Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Deep. We have a very special guest this episode who I'd like to welcome. He is responsible for formation for teachers and students for Sydney Catholic schools. He's also formerly a teacher, an author, and also a leading Catholic apologetic. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr Robert Haddad.
Thanks very much, Jade, and I'm really honoured to receive this invitation. Very happy to be here today, and congratulations on this initiative. We're in a bit of a springtime now when it comes to good Catholic things happening, and this is another example of it, which is great.
Yeah, well, so this is probably a bit of a build upon from the wonderful work that was happening here for many years in terms of Guardians, and I think the idea was to get this on a digital platform to be able to communicate it not only in Sydney but Australia and maybe globally as well if the topics interest people. So, and there's been a lot of great work done in the Maronite eparchy as well. There's a lot of great podcasts that have been popping up and individuals that are doing some wonderful things. So,
and you can't have too much of it.
No, you can't.
When a couple of months ago I was having a conversation with someone and they said to me, we're getting too many of these podcasts now. And I said, no, you can't have too many. The market forces will determine whether we got too many or not.
That's
and
right.
all I know is that since I got into Instagram just over a year ago, there's a lot of rubbish out there. Okay, there's a lot of anti-Catholic stuff, all sorts of people saying all sorts of things. So we need as many Catholics as possible to be doing the opposite, getting out there, promoting the faith, promoting the doctrine, defending the faith, promoting prayer, letting people know about great things that are happening in different parts of the Catholic world, to build our morale, to build our confidence, and to get other people making things happen. Because, as I said, I'm excited and happy because I'm seeing a lot of lay people do stuff, that didn't exist 5-10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, 40 years ago. So this is for me, this is finally a realization of what the Second Vatican Council asked for, how the laity should live out our baptism and our confirmation, where we got our leaders, we've got the hierarchy, we've got our bishops and priests, and that's how it always should be. But they're there to help us sanctify the world. And I'm seeing more and more laity doing wonderful things. And I just say, more the better. Yep, including this.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. It's not just my part. There's a wonderful team that is behind this. But isn't it amazing that in the world that we live in now, the ability to disseminate information very quickly and without needing to have any qualification per se. I mean, if I have an idea and there's an audience that actually resonate with that idea, those ideas can go viral, as they say.
Yeah. And say your idea is not a good one. Okay, well, people have the freedom to counter it.
Exactly.
And when you use the word qualification, that always rings bells for me, because when I was teaching here at St Charbel's College, for the first 12 years, I had no qualifications in education. But I think they are the best years of my teaching. Qualifications don't come from having written books or having degrees. Yes, that's what the world recognizes, and that's what the world expects to see in an expert. Degrees, essays, articles, books, whatever. But we're qualified to teach the faith, to promote and defend the faith by our baptism and confirmation. So, that's the real qualification. And if people want to live that out and do that dynamically, and they're going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes. I make plenty of mistakes, and I'll probably make mistakes today in this interview. But we make mistakes because we're trying. The only people that don't make mistakes are those who don't try.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You get out there, you say what you believe to be right, and if you're wrong or mistaken, whatever, well, someone else will be able to come in and correct you, and you'll learn from that, and you'll be better for that.
Yeah, I've always thought, I love the idea of getting started and then iterating on the way, as long as you're not doing some serious damage, of course. But, I think with things like this, it's better to get started and then, evolve throughout the journey rather than just waiting to be perfect and started, because you're never going to be perfect and you'll never start.
Exactly right. And if I was to wait until I learned everything before I started doing adult faith education, I would never have started, because we never learn everything. No one does. We are always learning. We start with basic stuff. We always start teaching people that know less than us. And that's the basic principle. For example, if you're a lecturer at university, you always lecture to a level lower than yourself. So you always start by teaching to people who know less than you, and you will learn because of your teaching. And you will continually learn, and I find that exciting. I'm always learning. I'm always reading. I have a program of reading every week. I must read at least 50 pages of Catholic material a week. That's my personal rule. And it's like keeping the engine oiled. It's like keeping the petrol tank full. And because I keep learning, and I'm always improving my teaching and the content of what I'm delivering and the range of topics I can speak on. And that should be the case for anyone who feels they're being moved by the Holy Spirit to be active.
That's a wonderful insight. Wow, 50 pages minimum. What are you reading at the moment?
I've just started a book on the doctrine, on the primacy of St. Peter and the papacy.
Wow.
It's written by a fellow named James Lacudis. I never really went into, for decades I've never been formally studying issues relating to controversies concerning Catholics and Orthodox. But I am in more recent times, and mainly because of my older son, Elio, who's very interested in that area. But I'm not reading and learning this area in order to, go into conflict against the Orthodox. I don't want that. I don't believe in that. I believe in learning about the controversies so we can somehow revisit the reunion councils we had in 1274 at Second Council of Lyon and the Council of Basil, Ferrara and Florence, which was from 1431 to 1449. We had formal reunions with the Orthodox through those councils. They fell apart afterwards because local revolts in the East refused to accept those formal resolutions. But I want to study the issues, and there are at least a dozen issues that separate us, or that preclude a full communion between us and the Orthodox. I want to know what those issues are. I want to know the Catholic position, the Eastern Orthodox position, and see how we can come to an agreement and a formal, final reunification. I'm going to be doing a talk this year on the Easter question, why we have Easter celebrated most of the time on separate dates. Understanding both sides of the argument and perhaps proposing some type of compromise. The Catholic position is firmly the correct position because we base ourselves on a calendar, the Gregorian calendar since 1583, which is astronomically more correct than the Julian calendar. We both shared the usage of the Julian calendar since the Council of Nicaea in AD 325 to 1583. The Julian calendar really is redundant astronomically because it's inaccurate by 11 minutes a year, all right, while the Gregorian calendar is only inaccurate by 26 seconds a year. So this is what I'm studying. This is what I'm looking at. So this is what I'm reading now, issues relating to the papacy. And why for 1,000 years we all agreed that the Bishop of Rome had primacy and supremacy with respect to the Church, a universal jurisdiction. And how we can go back to that without threatening Orthodox traditions and the beautiful things that they have, etc. And how we can, from that, recognition of the universal jurisdiction of the papacy, based in Scripture, based in the canons of particular ecumenical councils that we share, how we can be in full communion again. We need to be. It's a scandal. It's weakening us. We're meant to be two lungs, east and west. Christianity began in the east. It began in Jerusalem. It began in the Holy Land. It spread from the Middle East. It's not a European thing as such. It became a European thing. It's not a Western thing as such. It became a Western thing. And it should not be just a European or Western thing. We should reunify as quickly as possible. If I was Pope, and of course I'm not and never will be, and that's probably a great thing, but if I was Pope, that would be my priority. And I've said that before in other interviews, how to reunite so we end the scandal of division. The reunification will strengthen the church, bring us into full brotherhood and sisterhood in the one baptism, and how we can re-evangelize particularly the Western world, because the Western world is dying. And it's choosing to die. It wants to shed Christianity. It wants to abandon it. It wants to go on different paths that will be self-destructive ultimately. Because these paths basically are all imbibing the sexual revolution, which is destroying everything we know and understand about life, love, sexuality, marriage, family, the culture that's built from that, objective truth, reality. All these things are being challenged, undermined, threatened by what we call woke. Woke is the word that sums up this revolutionary process. And the Western world, there are too many people in the Western world who want to go down this path. And that's a conscious, deliberate rejection of Christianity. So we need unity to be strengthened and absorb each other's good traditions, unite them, and so we can be a more powerful force of evangelization and to re-Christianize the world.
Rob, I want to speak to you about particularly your background as an educator, over 30 years in education. I know and I can see, and anyone that knows you knows that it's very much a vocation for you. And I think a lot of your faith and I think a lot of your discernment about what God's calling for your life has eventuated in the realization that I'm meant to be doing what I'm doing. So you're probably a good person to ask this question to in relation to the Catholic Church and their influence, their involvement in education. Why have they been so influential over the many hundreds of years in education, in learning, in growing in knowledge? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it comes back to the original commission that Christ gave to the apostles. Go baptize all nations, okay? Preach the gospel to all. And so in doing that, in fulfilling that, being faithful to that, we must give reasoned explanations as to why people should believe in one God. Remember, this is a world, when Jesus came, it was a world where civilizations believed in all sorts of gods, multiple gods, hundreds, thousands of gods. So Christianity's been commissioned to go forth to the ends of the earth. And here in Punchbowl, this is part of the ends of the earth. We got there. It got there, okay? And challenge every other belief system. So we have to have reasonable arguments for why there's one God, reasonable arguments for why Jesus of Nazareth is the promised Messiah, because not everyone who was waiting for the Messiah accepted Jesus. Reasonable arguments for all the teachings of Jesus. And all the moral teachings, the Ten Commandments, the sacramental teachings, all that. And so we have to educate people. And at first that's going to be personal, one-on-one conversions, in meeting, in marketplaces, in homes, in the open air, whatever. But over the centuries, it will begin to become more formalized, more organized. And so what records we have of the first school in the church's history was actually in Egypt, in Alexandria, the Alexandrian Catechetical School, which was founded by a person named Pantaenus in the late 2nd century. And he went on to be a missionary in Arabia, following St. Bartholomew, the apostle who did the first missionary work to the Arabian Peninsula. And then you had Clement of Alexandria. as the second head of that school. And then you had Origen of Alexandria, one of the great fathers of the church, who wrote thousands of different pieces of works and letters, etc. And that was a school of catechetics and philosophy, theology, scripture study that lasted well into the late 4th century. So it lasted for a couple of 100 years. Then, of course, with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the barbarian invasion, civilization as such, classical civilization, went backwards. Okay, it retreated, and it was preserved in the monastic movements in the East and in the West, particularly in the West with Benedictinism, St. Benedict of Nursia. And the monasteries that were founded by the Benedictines became the new centres of culture and civilization. Villages, towns, cities would build around the stable monastic, the monasteries of the Benedictines, and the Benedictines as monks, they prayed, they worked, but they also copied, they studied. They preserved manuscripts, they copied the scriptures, the ancient classical works, the church fathers, etc., etc. So they became centres of learning. And then eventually, and this is a very brief overview, but eventually you had the development of the universities. And they were directly products of the church at the time in the late Middle Ages. Those famous universities today that we know, Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne in Paris, University of Paris, Bologna.
My dad actually studied in the Sorbonne. Actually.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And that had a Catholic origin, okay? And because the church also has a responsibility, not just to preach about God and Jesus, which is the core, the essential core, without compromise, but also to teach all other sciences. We don't want a divorce between the religious and the secular, as if they're two different streams of truth that are somehow parallel with each other but never connect. All truth, religious and secular, comes from God. And so the Catholic Church should be institutionalizing education so that we educate the whole person in the religious and the secular sciences. And we therefore form civilization. We don't just teach people knowledge, we teach people how to live, how to be social, how to interact. We build culture, hence Christian civilization, which reached its peak in the late Middle Ages, and since has been in decline, and where we are now, and much of what we are now we really couldn't call civilization, but as anti-civilization. And then the church developed, particularly after the Reformation. The challenge of the Reformation caused the Catholic Church to rethink how it educated its clergy. So it had the development of the seminaries, the seminary system. Because beforehand, future priests were developed like apprentices. They worked side by side in the diocese with other clergy and the bishops, etc., or in charter houses or religious houses, etc. Then you had the seminary system, which systematized the education of priests. And the Jesuits were very strong in that regard. And you want to be a Jesuit priest, it'll take you 14 years, not 7, et cetera, et cetera. And the Jesuits were huge in reimagining Catholic education and formalizing it, not just for themselves, but for everyone else. So they developed their colleges and their schools and their universities. From the 19th century onwards, we had an explosion of new religious orders. And most of them were teaching orders. Post-French Revolution, in particular in France, you had the Lassallians, you had the Marists. You had a proliferation of female religious orders as well. And many of these orders came to Australia, which is why so many of our Catholic schools have long traditions through their religious orders, their charisms going back to Europe. We've got Jesuit schools, Dominican schools, Franciscan schools, Marist schools, Lassallian schools, etc., etc. And of course, other schools in more recent times that have been founded by, for example, the Opus Dei movement or the Maronites here in Australia and the Melkites, etc., and others. So, the tradition continues, and it should always be there. But this is my caveat. The formal education, Catholic education, which is great, is not always great in every way, but it can never replace the role of the parent. as
Can
the
I ask you
first
something, Rob?
primary educator. Yeah.
Can I ask you something? Sorry to cut you off. You said it's not always great. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like
Yeah,
what
because
areas?
there's so many areas of it. And we've just seen a controversy now here in Sydney regarding one of our universities, and the current Archbishop of Sydney, Anthony Fisher, has gone public about how he's not happy with what's happening in that particular university. So, yeah, you can have formal institutions, okay, and they're meant to be teaching the Catholic faith authentically. That's what they have to do. And there are many in all institutions who try to do that. But there are some, to use a rugby league analogy, gaps in the back line. Okay? So why I say that, and the reason why I say that, is because I want to go back to the foundation, which is that the parents are the first educators. And they must be the ones teaching their children from the very beginning all aspects of life in the same way the church does, the social, the cultural, the moral, the intellectual, etc., etc. So that they prepare their children so that wherever they go, whether it be infant school, primary school, secondary school, Catholic universities, secular universities, any institution, the workforce, they're going to come across whatever things that are right and wrong. They have to be fortified for that or against that. And parents should never let themselves just retreat into some fallback position where they say to themselves, oh, I'm doing the right thing. I'm sending my kids to Catholic school. That's enough. It's not enough. You got to be still the Catholic school at home. And you send your children to a Catholic school to provide the education your children need in areas you as a parent can't supply. But you can't just sit back and relax and just say, I've done my bit by sending my kids to school X, paying the fees, that's it, and you're not doing anything at home, and you're not providing any support at home in case any issues arise. So I think that was a big problem in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It was a Catholic cultural thing that, Catholics who are in Australia in particular, lower socioeconomic status, generally lower education, rather marginalised, excluded in our culture. And they weren't that well educated, and they really relied upon the school to educate their children, the good priest, the good religious. And so they always sort of like passed the buck to the school. And that was okay for a while. But when things, as we transitioned away from religious in schools, and that was happening in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, that transition didn't go to plan as we would have hoped, as well as it should have. And we still relied on the school to supply all the needs in Catholic education. I think that's where things perhaps went a little bit astray somewhat. We're more conscious of the need now to ensure, at least for where I operate. Where do I operate? I operate in Sydney Archdiocese, Sydney Catholic Schools. I still have a lot of friends in Maronite Catholic education. We're more conscious now, this day and age, of the need to make Catholic education authentically Catholic. And I've seen a lot done in that area over the last 10 to 20 years to really improve the situation. I think St Charbel's College, where I first started working for 15 years I worked there, and I first began working there in 1990. It was a clean slate. I came into a school that was brand new. And there was only 9 teachers and 99 students, and I was made assistant principal after just 5 weeks at the age of 25, and I ran the show with religious education. So the principal at the time trusted me to do whatever I wanted. So I had a clean slate. I had a miraculous clean slate.
Well, you know what? I think you've done a great job, because I remember my earliest memory of you, Rob, is I remember when I was in Year 10, this is many years ago, St Charbel's had like a teens cruise, like a harbour cruise.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to this school, but it was open to others as well. So I remember purchasing a ticket, and I caught a bus from St Charbel's to the city with everyone. And I remember you walked onto the bus and all of the students erupted in applause and cheers when you walked onto the bus. And I know it was probably, you know, lighthearted and that, but I believe, as firm and strict as I know that you were, there was that deep respect amongst the students, because I think they could tell that you really loved what you were doing. And I know from my experiences at school, despite sometimes my want at times to do whatever I wanted, I always respected those teachers who were firm but fair.
Yeah, exactly
and
right.
really showed that they loved what they were doing. And that love was shown in the preparation, the extra time that they would put in, the extra resources or support that they would give to the students. The students realise that. They can tell. And I know I've got some good mates that are teachers myself, and the ones that I know that are doing really well, I can tell how vocational that role that they have is, and how much time and effort they're putting in, and they're getting the rewards. They're really, you can tell that the students are gravitating to them, and they're growing, and you know, they're becoming better men and women because of their influence over them.
Firm and fair is exactly correct. You can't be just firm and not fair, and you can't be fair and not firm. Because if you're not, particularly in our culture, I mean, what I've found in this school, St. Charbel's, is that the Lebanese mindset is that instinctively respects teachers and instinctively expects them to be strong and tough. But you have to be fair. Now, also, I remember that event you're talking about, and I also was very cautious about those cruises, especially when we were inviting students and people outside of the school, because I was very worried always about the music that would be played. So I had rules about that. And I had specific instructions for the DJs, which were not always followed, sadly. And I had rules about behaviour and the rules of dress code as well. And because you just have to always be vigilant in that regard, without wanting to crush young people's desire to have a bit of fun, you know, etc. So, yes, that was a great time in my life.
It was actually a great time to be a young person as well at that time. We probably were shielded from all of the things that young people are faced with at the moment. I want to go back to something that you said about the importance of the home. I've got kind of two things that I wanted to ask you. Well, one's not really, one's kind of a question as well. I mean, I love, there's a quote that the greatest gospel message that your children will read is your marriage. And that, I think, is a very powerful quote, because it's quite obvious how much families, marriages are facing a lot of challenges in this present day. It's no secret. I mean, I'm sure we all know families who are struggling. It might be our own families. And then there's been a lot of challenges in education as well. So you're coupling that, the challenges in education, the changing in society norms, you know, the changes in what society expects and calls normal and not, and then also families facing a lot of challenges as well. How much impact do you think that's had on the education system?
Well, the changes in culture and societal norms have been enormous. And I go on to say that they are very threatening. And we can never allow ourselves to bend our knee to those changes. Remember, when Christianity came into the world, cultural norms were very un-Christian in the way they worshipped, their priorities in life, the emphasis on power, wealth, pleasure, sex, you know, unbridled. There was no... Christianity came into the world proclaiming one God, Jesus Christ, who taught humility, purity, fidelity, completely countercultural. So Christianity changed all that over time. Centuries, millennia it took to change the culture to a Christian culture. Now we're in a revolutionary phase. This has been going on for many hundreds of years now, where we are unraveling Christian civilization and replacing it with a new disorder of things. I don't call it order, I call it a disorder of things. And if we cannot allow ourselves to just put up the white flag and say, hey, we must conform to the world, because then we're not faithful anymore. Okay, so our schools have to be vigilant to ensure that we remain faithful to the gospel and the teachings of the church. Families have to be resilient in this area too. The home has to be a Garden of Eden where the parents, and here, let's say the father, let's focus on the father here, has to be Adam doing the job properly, watching out for what comes into the garden of every home, the influences. We can't always control everything 100%, but we can create an atmosphere, a culture in the home that is clearly Christian, Catholic Christian, and that if anything un-Catholic or un-Christian comes into that realm, we can identify it immediately and push it back out, reject it. The family is more than under stress. The family is under deliberate attack. The devil wants to destroy the family, because you destroy the family, you destroy the church. The church is made up of families. Like this building we're in now, I'm looking at the walls, is made up of bricks. You want to destroy this building, you can do it in two different ways. You can just bring a wrecking ball and just smash the whole thing in one go, or you can just white ant every brick. And if you white ant every brick, you'll destroy this building eventually. The devil wants to destroy the church, and to take it on head on is too difficult. To white ant it family by family is, in my view, his current tactic. And if we destroy the family, we destroy future vocations to marriage and family, which is the normative vehicle for spreading the gospel to the next generation, raising future citizens for earth and heaven, and also destroying future vocations of the priesthood and religious life. I'll give you one example of a story. That's a true story I encountered when I attended a talk at Belfield, St Michael's Belfield, in the beginning of 1998. And there was this English priest came, and he was telling us his life story where he was a mediocre priest. That's what he said. He was a mediocre priest. He was raised, formed badly in the seminary, wasn't taught Catholic doctrine much. Then he went on a pilgrimage. He went on a pilgrimage to Medjugorje in Bosnia, and I'm not someone who subscribes to the apparitions there as such, but he had a conversion experience there as a Catholic priest. Right? And then he began to serve as a chaplain in a hospital in Britain, in London. And, he would mix with the staff, and one day, from time to time, he'll notice two nurses who were always in the canteen area, morning tea and lunch, but they never eat anything. And this got him curious. And he one day just had the courage to sit with them, join them and sit with them and join the conversation. And he said, look, I noticed, ladies, you never eat anything when you're here. Are you fasting? Are you abstaining? Are you religious in any way? Are you Christian? Are you Catholic? And they responded by saying, one of the nurses said, oh, no, we're religious, but we're not Christian. We're not Catholic. We're actually witches. And we are fasting and offering up that fast to destroy Christian marriages. This is what the priest said. I have never forgotten that. And I'm standing at the back of the room listening to this talk, and I'm shocked. I'm shocked about, firstly, how evil our opposition are, and secondly, how determined they are in their cause. And why aren't we that determined for our cause? So we got to not just defend the family. We got to go on the offensive. We got to promote marriage and family. We got to promote what marriage is naturally between a man and a woman, that it comes from God. In the Christian realm, it's a sacrament. It's what God has joined together. Let no man put asunder. Let's war against divorce and remarriage. Let's, contradict contraception. Let's, believe in the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. Let's be generous in the number of children we have. Let's raise our children in the Catholic faith for God. Let's go on, and let's teach people how to endure all the difficulties of marriage and not just bail out as soon as it gets difficult. right? Let's learn how to be unselfish in marriage, how to love in marriage, how to be generous in marriage, so that we persevere in marriage. And that's how we will rebuild the church. It won't be through fancy programs that cost a lot of money. It'll be through what we did in the beginning, working with people one-on-one, personal conversions, and reforming people's personal lives and therefore the way they live their marriage lives.
And re-emphasising the family, I think, like to your point, doesn't need anything fancy. It just needs families sitting on the dinner table praying and, sitting together on the dinner table firstly, and then being able to pray together and being able to be in tune with each other.
That's right. And the conversation at home, you got pictures on the wall, you got icons on the wall, you got your statue here, statue there. Put that there, but the conversation has to be culturally religious, and that the father has to be modelling. The father has to be seen praying by the children. The stats are there. If the dad is praying and going to mass, it's a 90% chance the children will do likewise, especially the boys. If the father is not and only the mother is, that percentage for boys drops to 17%. That's out there. That's a fact.
Heard that before. Yeah.
Exactly right. You've heard of it before because it's out there and it's real. So the dads have to model it. If any dads or any males watching this podcast, you model it. You be seen holding that rosary in the home. You be seen on your knees in prayer. You be seen standing in the line at confession. And that's how your children, especially your sons, will take it up. Got to go back to old-fashioned religion.
Of course.
I believe that. Old-fashioned religion.
And the irony of our conversation, or the funny thing about our conversation is we're trying to talk about the education system, but we've actually just uncovered or maybe just re-revealed something so important about the education system, is that the school of the home, in terms of the faith, is so important.
That's the most important part of the education system.
And it's not to fend off that the school has a responsibility, but it's also to remember. And look, pressure at home, I would believe, puts pressure on the children, and they go to school as students with a lot of pressure on them. And that, I'm sure, affects their ability to be sound learners and responders as well. I mean, if you're a child going through, a large amount or, suffering or struggle at home, what's your schooling education life going to be like? Yeah. As a young child, from a young age, if that's what you're experiencing at home, how can a young child at 5, 6, 7 years old comprehend that and be able to communicate that properly, and then also go and take on the responsibilities and the demands of what it is to be a student in these days? And that's just the education part, not including the social part and the technology influence on education and social media and finding good friends and, all of those kind of things as well. So there is such an important case to be built upon working hard on the family and the marriage. I'm really glad that you've spoken about that, Rob, because I feel very strongly about that. I think that's a very, very important factor. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the direction of the school will follow the direction of the families.
Well, I work in a system where we're conscious of the fact that parents are first educators. They're paying fees. They're the customer, and we have to meet their needs. So we have a whole directorate in our system called School Support, which actually fields concerns, queries, questions, even complaints from parents. We manage them. We don't ignore them. And so we're much more conscious now of the fact that we have to meet standards, not just for the National Education Standards Authority, NESA, what used to be the Board of Studies, NAPLAN, HSC and all that. Yeah, we have to meet all that. And parents want all that. And that's never going to change. But parents also want to know that, why am I paying fees? Why am I sending my kids to that school here, St. X, when I could just send them to whatever ex-public school down the road for free and get the same education, get the same NAP plan results, HSC results. Why am I paying extra fees? Because I want a Catholic education. And what does that mean? Not just culturally Catholic. I want my children to be taught the faith, to reinforce what I'm doing in the home, to support what I'm doing in the home, adding to what I'm doing in the home, and so that my children come out to be faithful people, faithful to God, faithful to neighbour. We used to have a document, policy document, faithful to God, faithful to people, right? In principle, that's correct. And I'm paying those fees, and I expect this to be done. And if I've got concerns, I want to know that my concerns will be heard.
Rob, I want to ask you a question in regards to, there might be some people that are listening to this that may question some of the things that have been said in relation to, we've got to be Catholic in our teaching, and you've gone into detail about what the role of the Catholic Church and the Catholic teaching has been in the past over many centuries in education. And they might say, well, society's shifted. And we've discussed that, different social values and social norms. And maybe it's shifted to the point where the Catholic teachings might be seen as uncharitable to certain people, their lifestyles or their choices or their values, but yet they want to send their children to a Catholic school. What should our position be about that, Rob?
Well, we need to educate parents, firstly, to make them realise that our Catholic teachings are not uncharitable. They're not just policy teachings of a political party that we can change at will. It's part of revelation. It comes from God. It comes from Jesus Christ. And there's certain things we just cannot change. And it's not about being charitable or uncharitable. So we need to keep reminding people, educating people that there's certain fundamentals, without being fundamentalist, but there's certain foundational things about Christianity that can never change. If society changes, we have to examine those changes and see whether they're really authentic, whether they're healthy, whether they're good, whether they're moral. If they're not, well, we can't go down that road. If people are unhappy that we're not going down those roads, well, there's another school down the road. It's a public school. Okay? I don't want to be sending Catholic people to public schools, but no one should be approaching Catholic schools and demanding that we be less Catholic. Okay? So, yeah.
Because near enough is not good enough, right, Rob?
What is near enough?
That's right.
Okay, I've built that dam. There's this hole there near the bottom, but that's okay because most of it's there. That's not good enough because that hole's going to make sure the dam doesn't work at all. So near enough is not good enough. But we got to teach things in a way that are. So I like to be a teacher I used to be a teacher at first, and I think this worked, and it was good at the time, where it was like the Ten Commandments: "Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, don't." Right? Then I came over years to gradually change so that I'm not changing the teaching, I'm changing how I packaged it. Do. Rather than don't. So shine what the goodness of the Catholic faith and why it is good, true, and beautiful, and make it something attractive so that people will say, hey, yeah, that's what I want to be, that's what I want to do. And then they'll leave sin by just simply gravitating to the good.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Rob, because I always think to myself, whenever people think that, Catholics might be boring or the Catholic teaching is there to restrict your life, we also got to remember that if we're truly following Christ, did Christ not himself say, I came so that they may have life and they may have it to the fullest?
It's not restricting.
Exactly.
That's a lie. It's liberating. Because what's the alternative? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Somehow it's not working. These people, when you just scratch under the surface, they're not happier. They're happier in the movies, in the pictures, in the front pages of the glamour magazines, but that's a facade. They're not happier. You cannot be happier than a person who's faithfully living out the Christian life in the Catholic Church. You cannot be happier than that. Boring? No, I've never been bored. Maybe I'm a boring person. Some people find me boring, but I'm not bored being a practicing Catholic.
How can you be bored 50 pages a week minimum?
Some people,
That's
yeah, but that's me. But look, I don't see anyone. Look, I remember Cardinal Pell when he was alive, and actually this is the second anniversary of his death today. God rest his soul.
Is it today?
Yeah. Yes,
God
right.
rest his soul.
He once said something that the sexual revolution has failed. It's made us more miserable, more sad. More people are in distress. With the breakdown of the family, more women are in poverty. More women are discarded. The contraceptive pill did not liberate women. It reduced women to the sexual objects of lustful men who could just use, abuse, and throw away. Okay. Same with divorce. Okay. Sadly, when you have abusive situations, separation is necessary, right? But did divorce really liberate people? Right, it really left a lot of people abandoned and impoverished, and we are not happier as a civilization, as a culture, as a people, as a world because of all these changes. Christianity is somehow restrictive. Well, that's what the prodigal son thought about his dad in the parable. And he went off and he did what a lot of young people do today. Dad, hurry up and die. Give me my half share of the inheritance. And I'm going to go out there. And he did his sex, drugs and rock and roll there in the 1st century AD. Right? And he went with wine and women and wasted all his money. And where did he end up? In a pit of mud with the pigs. For a Jewish audience, that's rock bottom, to be in the mud with the pigs. Then grace of God still working on him said, I was happier when I was with my dad. That is, I was happier when I was faithful to God in the church. I'll go back and just be a slave again, like the other servants. I'll be a slave like the other servants. And I'll be happier than I am now. But the Father, who represents God, embraced him and brought him back to full sonship. Right? That's the story of the prodigal son is applicable to almost anyone today. Okay, it's young people who think they're going to find greater happiness in an immoral lifestyle where they're just a lifestyle of indulgence and drink and drugs and sexual promiscuity. They wake up one day thinking, why am I empty?
I use this analogy like we're drowning in our own freedom.
Yeah.
It's like putting somebody in the ocean and saying, drink as much as you can. We've got so much freedom, but yet people are just so, like you said, miserable and depressed and just constantly chasing the unquenchable thirst of what they call happiness.
Exactly right.
And it's, I read this beautiful quote, I wish I could remember it, but it's something regarding happiness and about how people are so miserable just on the chase of what they perceive to be happiness. And
the more money they have, the more money they want. And the more drugs they use, the more and different types of drugs they want. And the more sex they have, the more different types of experiences they want. It's never satisfying. Because we are spiritual beings, not just physical beings.
Amen. Rob, I wonder, and we spoke about it at the beginning, and we've touched on it throughout the talk in regards to the importance of, the teachers and the way that they maybe come to realise the vocational nature of the teaching profession. And of course it is a job and they get paid for it and that's fine. But you also have the ability to shape and mould young human beings and really set them on a trajectory in their life, be it good or bad. I'm going to ask you in relation to the Catholic school system, how important is it? And if there's a gap, how much work needs to be done, or if there's teachers listening here that want to improve their knowledge of the faith, how important is their knowledge of the faith in relation to their career as a teacher in the Catholic school system? I'm referring to the Catholic school system here. Obviously, we're a Catholic podcast, so I'm referring here to the Catholic school system.
I think it's 100% important. Every primary school teacher is also a religion teacher. And we've got thousands of teachers within the secondary schools that are also religion teachers in one way or another. Building knowledge We do a lot of work to build teacher knowledge formally. We have a very generous sponsorship program where we pay 75% of the fees for any person to get their graduate certificates, to get their diplomas, to get their master's degrees, to be formally accredited to teach religious education or to be a religious education coordinator. That's part of the solution, but that's not the whole solution. The whole solution also requires each individual to be enthusiastic enough to do their own formation, self-formation, their own reading, their own prayer, their own study, their own reading. And that's probably where they learn a lot more, because I did a lot of formal study. The problem with formal study is that you hate studying. You hate doing assignments, you hate doing exams, and as soon as you enroll, you just want to finish the degree and move on. The best way to learn is actually through private study. You know, buying books, reading books, going to talks, listening to good podcasts, whatever. Do your own personal build-up and work on that continuously. You mentioned I read 50 pages a week. Yeah, I do. That's me. That's my personal build-up. I got plenty of formal study behind me, probably too much formal study. I learned most of what I know through informal personal reading. We need absolutely everyone who is in a classroom teaching religious education to be informed, to know more than what their students know, to be on top of the curriculum, to be able to teach the entire curriculum, to know what's in the textbooks, and to teach from all those textbooks, and to be able to field any question that comes from the students. And if they get a question they can't answer, to have the humility to say, listen, Joe, great question. I really don't know the answer now, but on Thursday when we're back again in the classroom, I'll have an answer for you. And then the teacher is continually learning through student questions. Right? And that was what helped me develop in my 20s and early 30s. Teaching was the way I learned most of my stuff. Okay? And I personally keep working at it almost on a daily basis. Yeah, on a daily basis. I read 3 or 4 pages a night, every night, just before I fall asleep. That's what I do. It's a habit I've got. And yeah, because when we moved away in the late 60s, early 70s, when the number of religious in our schools diminished and the lay people had to take up the work, the transition wasn't the most successful. And we know that from formal study. There was this brother named Brother Marcellin Flynn, very famous in Australian Catholic education history. He did a meta-survey from 1972 to 2000 on the religious practices and knowledge of our students. And it was clear, consistently clear, particularly from the early 70s onwards, that the results weren't as great as we would have liked. I don't have the details with me right off the top of my head now. I did collate them because I have taught from that data when I used to lecture in critical issues in RE at Notre Dame University. But we've got our own survey now that my boss, Dr. Anthony Cleary, a meta-survey since 2014, which we've conducted every 2 years, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. The largest sample size of any survey in the history of Catholic education, the average sample size around 18,000 plus or minus each time. And we know what's the state of play without the knowledge of our students and how they transition from year 3 to 5, 7, 9, 11. I think it's from 5, 7, 9, 11 we do the survey. And there's some grim reading there, but there are some really signs of hope too. The 2024 survey was the first one where we saw consistent improvement across the board. I'll give you one example. The number of students in year 11 who are either agnostic or atheist in Sydney Catholic schools hovered consistently from 2014 to 2022 at about 30 to 31%. Agnostic or atheist in year 11. They came into our high schools from year 6 to year 7 around 13% agnostic or atheist. And by the time they progressed to year 11, that increased to 30, 31%. But in 2024, that percentage dropped to 24%. So down from 31 to 24%. Hey, that's something to celebrate. Hey, we want it 0%. The pass mark is 100% of our students believe in God and, practice the faith. But we've got to be realistic. So that's significant. That's a significant movement in 2 years, down from 31 to 24. We want to make that continue. We want to keep driving that down, but it takes time. And there are other improvements across the board too. I can't remember them off the top of my head. It's just that that's a particular stat that I always focus on. It's a continual work in progress. Always renewal is necessary. Keep working at it. There are always teachers retiring, leaving the system. We're always importing new teachers by the hundreds into our schools every year, new graduates. So there's always this constant need to be forming and continually forming teachers. And we do that through retreats and staff meetings and conferences and events that we hold, special events, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an ongoing effort. Do we ever say, yeah, we've won it and we just sit down and relax? No, you can't sit down and relax. It's ongoing.
Rob, final question. There's so much conversation often about how hard teachers are worked, at times potentially underpaid, depending on who you might ask, and they're given more, there's more required of them, changes in legislation and curriculums, and students are quite different to how they might have been, 20 or 30 years ago. What would be your sell to somebody to become a teacher?
If they feel an inspiration, which is coming from God, from the Holy Spirit, as I did when I was 25. I was in Westpac Banking Corporation. 1 week later, I was in St. Charbel's College. That's a story that takes an hour to tell. But there was an inspiration there from God. If anyone feels a call to be a teacher, say yes to that. But you've got to tick off on the bureaucracy. This is the problem. This is the tension. The Holy Spirit, bureaucracy. Because bureaucracy can be very burdensome. For me, I've always wanted to be that teacher that goes into the classroom, that which teaches with passion and enthusiasm, gets the message across, answers all the questions, get the young kids to believe in God, believe in Jesus, love the church, accept the church's teachings, live those teachings, pray, do good, avoid evil, blah, blah, blah. That's all I wanted to do. All the bureaucracy I don't like, but you got to do it. You got to carry it. I still joke, if the apostles had the bureaucracy issues that we have today, that we impose on people today, the thing would have died in Jerusalem, right? But the Holy Spirit is still there. Get the inspiration, go for it, go to university, get the qualifications, do the postgrad qualifications, do all the professional learning. Be professional though. Don't be like I was a few times. Stay professional, but don't be so professional as to forget about the heart, the faith, the passion, the enthusiasm, the love, Get into that classroom and show the kids that you love God, that you love Jesus, that you love the church, that you live out the teachings. And that's the best way for them to learn and take it up. You go into a classroom and you say to the kids, what are you doing on the weekend? Are you going to go to Mass? No, we're not going to go to Mass. Well, I'm not going to go to Mass either because I'm going to the football game, the Bulldogs at the ANZ Stadium. Well, if you're not going to Mass as a teacher, why should they? But if I was to give the answer, yeah, guess what? I'm going to go to Mass early on Sunday morning, and then I'm going to go to lunch with my family, and then I'm going to go to the football at ANZ Stadium. And then you're showing to the kids that faith is important and it's always going to be there and it's immovable, it's going to come first, and family's immovable and it's going to be there. And then you follow football on the side as well. Oh, good. Then they'll follow you. They'll imitate you. But if the teacher is not praying, if the teacher's not believing, if the teacher's not living it, and the students know, then you are creating a catastrophe for those students and yourself. Don't be a teacher if you're going to be a bad teacher. Be a bricklayer. Be a tiler. Sorry, I love bricklayers. I love tilers. Be something else. Don't be a bad bricklayer either. I don't want the house falling down.
Don't be bad at what you do.
Yeah. But if you're going to be a bad teacher, don't be a teacher at all. Right? You're going to be a teacher. Love it and go in for the long haul. You know, I'm so glad I got the gift of the call to be a teacher. I knew the very moment when that barrister put the file on my desk and he said, I was working for Westpac Bank in Legal Corporation, 228 Pitt Street, level 5 or level 6. And he said, Robert, look at this brief. We want to settle out of the courts. We want to make the woman an offer. And have a look, and I'll come back in a few hours. So I'm going through this brief. It's that thick, page by page. And when I'm going through it, I'm thinking, you know, I'm on the side of this poor old little old lady. This is little old lady versus Westpac Banking Corporation. I feel sorry for her. I'm on her side. So by the end of it, when I looked through the whole file, and the barrister came back a few hours later and he said, well, Robert, what do you think? And I said, let's offer her $80,000. Now, this is August 89, and I'm 25 years of age. And the barrister, who was a gentleman, he said, Robert, we don't normally start that high. At that moment in my heart, I said, I'm not giving my life to the kingdom of Westpac. I don't know what it will be, but within a week after that, I had the job at St Charbel's College. Because I was sick for 3 days. I left the office. I was at home. I visited the church here one day. I came to the monastery. I had a chat with Father Anthony Tommy. And in that conversation, I said to him, Father, you know, I finished my law degree now. I don't really want to stay in law anymore. Have you got anything for me to do here? I didn't ask about the school or teaching. He offered me a job in the school. I just took it. My heart was inflamed. I said, that's it. Go, take it. Had an interview with the principal a few days later, Father George Sutton. Straight away, contract, 7 and 8, geography, history and religion starting next year. 5 months later, you know, February 1990. Get your dip ed and go for it. It was that fast. But you don't have to believe this bit, but this bit is true. In these months of June, July, August 89, when I was lying in bed just before I fell asleep, I used to just get thoughts in my mind of becoming a teacher. And I thought, I can't be a teacher, I'm a lawyer. I got no qualifications in education. Or maybe I could teach law, but I just got a bachelor's degree and it was a pass degree. I didn't get masters, I didn't get honours. So where could I teach law? Maybe in TAFE. On reflection, in hindsight, I look back at those thoughts as how God was preparing me for what he wanted me to do. And I was attracted to teaching for a very mundane reason. Oh yeah, if I become a teacher, I'll get more holidays, 12 weeks a year off. That's what I thought at the time. That's how God was working on me to move me to where he wanted. So when Father Anthony Tommy offered me the job as a teacher, that linked exactly with what these inspirations I was receiving in the months beforehand. And I just grabbed it and ran with it. You know, and I never looked back. I had friends of mine who said, you sure you want to go into teaching? Better be careful, Robert. You're very, hard-line Catholic. You won't last, But I did. I've lasted 35 years. And I just thought I'll be a teacher at St Charbel's College for 40 years, just teaching religion. That's it. I didn't want anything else. No power, no position, nothing else. Within 5 weeks, that all changed. Father Aziz Azzi made me AP of the secondary school after just 5 weeks. It was scandalous. It was. These days it would be ridiculous, but in those days that's how we did things, And I took that up, and I just had to carry that. But I never gave up teaching religious education because I did not come into teaching to be a bureaucrat. I did not come into teaching to be stuck in an office, administering a school. I did not leave law to teach legal studies. I left law to teach religion. So no matter what, I was going to keep doing that. And I'm thanks be to God, I'm still doing that.
And thanks be to God that you are still doing that. We're very thankful that you're still doing that, Robert. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been an extremely insightful discussion. I feel like I've just been chatting to a mate because I consider you a good mate as well, Rob. So
likewise.
Thank you very much.
And you do great work through your.
Thank you so much.
Through your emceeing at weddings.
Thank you.
Very,
so much.
very important. I've been to many a wedding where the tone of it was not very uplifting. the jokes, the comments were not very moral or clean, but you're different.
Thank
You're
you very
running the
much,
show.
Rob. Glory to God always.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Robert Haddad, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next episode. Stay tuned. Thank you.